There comes a moment in life when everything you thought you knew about love and loyalty shatters in front of you. For me, that moment came the day I realized my own son, the boy I had sacrificed my entire life for, no longer saw me as anything but an inconvenience. I had worked extra shifts, skipped vacations, and given up every dream I had so that he could chase his own. I paid for his education, stayed up late helping him prepare for job interviews, and even lent him money to start his first business. And I didn't mind. Every drop of sweat felt worth it because I believed that one day when he stood tall in the world, he would look back and say, "Dad, we did it together." But that day never came. When Adam finally became successful, when his name started appearing in business magazines and his company was thriving, I expected pride. Instead, I was met with distance, coldness, mockery. Suddenly, I was too old-fashioned to understand his world. He looked at me with the kind of pity you reserve for someone who is no longer useful. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at my hands, the same hands that had built his future, and something inside me broke. But here's the thing. I didn't beg for his respect. I didn't try to prove my worth. I took action, quiet, deliberate action that would force him to face the truth, not just about me, but about himself. And when he came crawling back, he didn't just find a father waiting. He found the hardest lesson he'd ever have to learn. I wasn't born with much, and maybe that's why I learned to value hard work so early in life. My father was a factory worker, my mother cleaned houses, and we never had money to waste. From the time I was a teenager, I worked odd jobs, washing cars, carrying boxes, anything that put food on the table. By the time I became a father myself, I had one promise burned into my heart. My son Adam would never have to struggle the way I did. Our house was small, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that always smelled of strong coffee and whatever I could afford for dinner that night. The floors creaked, the walls were thin, but it was ours. I'd wake up at 5 every morning, drink my black coffee in silence, and head off to my job at the workshop. My hands were always rough, my back always sore, but when I came home and saw Adam's face light up as he told me about his day at school, it made everything worth it. I remember the first time Adam said he wanted to be an entrepreneur. He must have been 12. He had seen some kids selling lemonade at the park and came running home, asking if we could do the same thing. I didn't just say yes. I built him a wooden stand with my own 2 hands. We spent the entire summer out there, sweating under the sun, learning about pricing, customers, and patience. Even back then, I knew he was meant for something bigger. When he got older, school wasn't always easy for him. There were times he wanted to give up, times when he failed exams and came home ashamed. But I never let him stay down for long. I'd sit with him at the kitchen table late into the night, helping him go over every subject until he understood. "You're smarter than you think," I'd tell him. "You just have to keep trying." As the years passed, my sacrifices became bigger. When Adam got into university, the tuition was higher than anything I'd ever paid for in my life. I worked weekends, I sold my old truck, and I even took out a small loan just to make sure he wouldn't have to drop out. There were days when I had nothing left in my bank account but a few coins, but I never told him. I didn't want him to worry. I wanted him to focus on building his future. When he graduated, I thought I'd never felt prouder. Seeing him walk across that stage in his cap and gown made every sleepless night worth it. When he got his first job, we celebrated with a cheap dinner at our favorite diner. But to me, it felt like we were dining at a 5-star restaurant. But it wasn't just school or work. I was there for every milestone. When he wanted to move into his first apartment, I spent 3 weekends helping him paint the walls and put together furniture. When he said he wanted to start his own business, I didn't hesitate. I emptied my savings account to help him get started. I didn't invest expecting anything back. I did it because that's what fathers do. And for a while, things were good. He would call me every week, telling me about new clients, about how much he'd learned. Sometimes he would even thank me, saying he couldn't have done it without me. Those were the moments I lived for. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was full of small victories. Sunday dinners with just the 2 of us, laughing about silly things. Watching old movies on our worn-out couch. Talking about the future like it was something we were building together. That was the man I was. Quiet, steady, maybe a little too simple by some people's standards, but my heart was always in the right place. My whole life was about making sure Adam had opportunities one never did. What I didn't realize at the time was how quickly success could change someone. I thought we'd face the future side by side. I thought my years of sacrifice had built a bond that couldn't be broken. But I was wrong. Things started to change slowly, almost too quietly to notice at first. At the beginning, Adam's business was small, and he still called me for advice every few days. He would drop by the house just to sit at the kitchen table and talk through his plans. I'd brew us coffee, the same way I always did, and we'd go over numbers together. He'd leave smiling, promising to come by again soon. But then his company started growing. He landed his first big investor, then a second. His office went from a small rented room to a shiny space in the middle of downtown. He hired staff, bought new suits, and started traveling to meetings in other cities. I was proud, of course, but I could feel the distance starting to grow. The calls became less frequent. When I tried to ask how things were going, his answers were shorter. Busy, Dad. I can't talk right now. Busy. That word became his favorite excuse. I tried to understand. After all, success demands time, attention, and sacrifice. I had done my share of sacrificing. Surely he was just caught up in the whirlwind of his new life. But then came the first sting, small, but sharp enough to leave a mark. We were at a family barbecue, and one of his cousins asked how the business was going. Adam laughed and said, "It's going great. All self-made, you know?" I froze. All self-made. As if those years I spent working 2 jobs, emptying my savings, and paying off loans hadn't happened. I didn't say anything then. I told myself it was just a slip of the tongue. But the word stayed with me long after everyone else had gone home. Not long after, I overheard him talking to a friend on the phone. He said something I'll never forget. "My dad means well, but he just doesn't get it. He still thinks hard work means using your hands. He doesn't understand the kind of world I live in now." That one cut deep. I had built my life around hard work. My calloused hands, my aching back, they were proof that I had given everything to give him a better future. And now, to him, that was something to be pitied. The next time I visited his office, I noticed the look on his assistant's face when I walked in, polite but uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure why I was there. Adam came out of a meeting, shaking hands with a client, looking sharp and confident in his tailored suit. When he saw me, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, maybe even annoyance. "Dad, you can't just drop by like this," he said, glancing nervously at his staff. I felt my chest tighten. "I just came to see how you're doing. Maybe grab lunch." He sighed, checking his watch. "I'm busy. We'll talk later." I left that office feeling like an outsider in my own son's life. The distance kept growing. Calls became rare, then non-existent. Invitations stopped coming. When I tried to offer advice about a new business deal, he brushed me off. "Dad, no offense, but you don't know how this world works. Let me handle it." One night, I saw a social media post of him at an awards ceremony, holding a trophy for Young Entrepreneur of the Year. His caption read, "No one believed in me, but I made it anyway." No one believed in him. The words burned. I had believed in him when no one else did. I had sacrificed everything. The final blow came one afternoon when I called him just to check in. He answered, sounding impatient. "Dad, I don't have time for this. You're stressing me out. Maybe it's better if we just take some space." Space. That was his polite way of saying I wasn't welcome anymore. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence. The house felt emptier than ever. All the sacrifices I had made, the long hours, the sleepless nights, the money I'd given, suddenly felt like they had been erased. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, looking at the photo frames on the wall. Adam as a baby, grinning with ice cream on his face. Adam on his first day of school, holding my hand. Adam at graduation, his arms slung around my shoulder. I stared at those pictures and felt a deep ache in my chest. Something inside me shifted. I realized I couldn't keep pretending things were the same. My son had turned his back on me, and I couldn't force him to see me differently. But I could stop enabling him. I could stop pouring my life into someone who no longer saw my worth. That was the night I made a quiet decision. From this day forward, I would no longer be his safety net. The first week after I decided to cut Adam off felt strange, quiet, almost unreal. For years, my life had revolved around his needs, his goals, his emergencies. If he needed money for rent, I was there. If a deal went south, I was the one wiring him cash before the bank even opened. Now, for the first time in decades, I didn't reach for my wallet. I didn't pick up the phone to make sure he was okay. At first, I thought maybe he wouldn't even notice. After all, he had become so independent, so distant. But I soon learned how much he had relied on my invisible support. A few weeks later, I got a call from one of his old friends, not from Adam himself. "Hey, Reese," the voice said hesitantly. "Did you know Adam's been having trouble with one of his suppliers? He mentioned he was trying to raise cash to cover a penalty clause. I figured you'd want to know." I thanked him and hung up, my chest tightening. The old me would have rushed to the bank, would have bailed Adam out without a second thought. But I sat there at the kitchen table, hands gripping the edge, and forced myself to stay put. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I hated imagining him stressed and scrambling. I hated knowing I could make it all go away with one phone call. But I also hated the way he had made me feel, small, outdated, unnecessary. If I kept stepping in to save him, he'd never see what I had done for him. He'd never learn. Another month passed, and then the first sign of real cracks appeared. I drove past his office one evening and noticed the lights off earlier than usual. The next morning, I saw a post online where one of his employees announced they had been let go due to restructuring. My heart sank. Later that week, I bumped into him by chance at the grocery store. He looked tired, the kind of tired you can't hide behind a suit. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt wrinkled, hair unkempt. He was pushing a nearly empty cart, staring at the floor. "Adam," I said softly. He froze for a moment before turning. "Dad." His voice was flat, guarded. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "How's everything?" I asked carefully. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Busy. You know how it is." But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't busy. He was barely holding things together. I wanted so badly to reach out, to tell him he didn't have to go through this alone. But the words stuck in my throat. When he walked away, I felt an ache deep in my chest. The kind of ache that isn't just sadness, it's grief. Grief for the boy he used to be, grief for the closeness we had lost. Over the next few weeks, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Mutual friends would mention that Adam had started missing events, skipping calls, withdrawing from his social circle. Rumors floated around that he'd lost a major investor. His once confident social media posts turned sparse and subdued. Every time I heard something new, it felt like a punch to the gut. This was my son, my pride and joy, and he was spiraling. And I, the man who had always been his anchor, was choosing to let him struggle. It tore me apart inside. Some nights, I'd sit in the living room with the phone in my hand, staring at his name on the screen, thumb hovering over the call button. But I never pressed it. Instead, I would put the phone down and whisper to myself, "He has to learn. He has to see what happens when he shuts me out." It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than working double shifts. Harder than selling my truck. Harder than any sacrifice I had made before. Because this time, the sacrifice wasn't money or time. It was my instinct as a father to protect my son. The weeks that followed were some of the longest of my life. Every day felt like a test of my resolve, a battle between my heart and my head. My heart wanted to run to my son and hold him, tell him everything would be okay. My head reminded me that stepping in too soon would only reset the cycle. He'd lean on me, take my help for granted, and never truly understand the weight of his choices. Then came a call. It was late, almost midnight, when the phone rang. My heart leapt into my throat when I saw Adam's name flash across the screen. For a second, I almost didn't answer. I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever he was about to say. When I picked up, there was no trace of the confident man I once knew. His voice was low, shaking. "Dad, I messed up." He explained everything in broken sentences. The supplier who sued him, the investor who pulled out, the contracts he couldn't fulfill. His business was crumbling, and with it his pride. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I don't have anyone else to call." Hearing those words nearly broke me. My son, the man who had once told me to give him space, The man who had mocked my way of life was now reaching out in desperation. I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to jump in, to fix everything like I always had. But I stayed silent for a long moment, letting the weight of his words settle. Adam, I said finally, my voice steady but heavy, you have to face this. You can't keep running from the consequences. You built this business. You have to find a way to save it. There was silence on the line. Then he said quietly, I thought you'd be angry. I'm not angry, I said. I'm disappointed. Not because you failed. Everyone fails. I'm disappointed because somewhere along the way, you forgot the people who helped you get here. He didn't reply. I could hear him breathing, shallow and uneven. When the call ended, I set the phone down and just sat there, staring into the dark. Tears welled up in my eyes, not just for him, but for me, for the father I used to be, the one who always had the answers. That man was gone now, replaced by someone who had to let his son fall so he could learn how to stand. The next day, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Adam had started selling off some of his belongings, his car, his expensive watch, even some of the furniture in his apartment, just to pay back part of what he owed. I won't lie. Part of me felt a sharp pang of pride, not because he was suffering, but because he was finally fighting for himself. But it was also painful to watch. When I saw him again a week later, he looked thinner, his clothes hanging loose. He didn't look like the polished entrepreneur from the magazine cover anymore. He looked like my son again, raw, vulnerable, human. Dad, he said quietly when we ran into each other outside the coffee shop we used to visit. I'm trying. I nodded, holding back the lump in my throat. Good. That's all I ever wanted. He looked like he wanted to say more, but stopped himself. Instead, he walked away, shoulders hunched, but there was something different about his stride. Determination, maybe, or humility. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because things were fixed, they weren't, but because for the first time, I believed they could be. Still, the road ahead was long. Adam would have to rebuild everything from the ground up, this time without shortcuts, without taking anyone for granted. And I would have to keep walking the thin line between helping him and letting him grow. I knew we weren't done yet. The real confrontation, the real reckoning was still coming. The call that night had shaken me, but what happened a few days later changed everything. I was in the garage, sorting through a box of old tools when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, Adam was standing there. He looked different, not just tired this time, but stripped of all the armor he used to wear. No suit, no polished smile. Just a young man who looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Can we talk? He asked quietly. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked slowly, as if each step took effort, and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once taught him how to count coins for his lemonade stand. I'm sorry, he said, the words tumbling out quickly, as though he'd been holding them back for too long. For everything. For how I spoke to you. For how I treated you. I thought I had to prove I didn't need anyone, that I could do it all myself. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I sat across from him, silent. Part of me wanted to rush in and forgive him, to tell him it was all okay. But I knew this was bigger than just an apology. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Adam, I said slowly, I never cared about the business. I never cared about the money. I cared about you. All those nights I worked extra shifts, all the times I bailed you out. I did it because I believed in you. But somewhere along the way, you stopped believing in us. You started thinking that success meant standing on top of the mountain alone. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I know. I thought if I looked back, it meant I was weak. I didn't want to feel like I owed anyone anything. I leaned forward, my voice firm but gentle. That's not weakness, son. Gratitude isn't weakness. Acknowledging the people who helped you doesn't make you smaller. It makes you stronger. But when you pushed me away, when you said I didn't understand, you didn't just shut me out of your business. You shut me out of your life. He dropped his gaze, shoulders shaking. I don't know if I can fix this, he whispered. I'll let the silence hang for a moment before speaking again. You can, but it won't happen overnight. This isn't about me bailing you out again. This is about you learning to stand, really stand, on your own 2 feet. No shortcuts, no excuses. And when you do, I'll be here. Not to save you, but to see you. His head snapped up at that. You'll still be here? Always, I said, but not as a crutch. As a father who knows you can do better. For the first time in months, I saw something familiar in his eyes. That fire, the determination I used to see when he was a boy selling lemonade in the summer heat. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and nodded. Okay, then I'll fix it. I'll fix everything. When he left that night, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him walk down the path. The air felt lighter somehow. This wasn't just about his business anymore. It was about rebuilding trust, respect, and everything that had been broken between us. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. Not the blind hope that everything would magically go back to how it was, but a stronger, steadier hope. The kind that comes when you know the worst is behind you, and the work of healing can finally begin. The days after that conversation felt different, heavier, but in a way that carried purpose. Adam didn't just talk about changing, he acted on it. I watched from a distance as he began to clean up the wreckage of his choices. The first thing he did was meet with his remaining employees. I heard later that he stood in front of them and apologized, not for the failure of the business, but for the way he had treated them along the way. He promised to do better, to rebuild in a way that was fair, honest, and sustainable. Some left anyway, unwilling to risk another collapse, but a handful stayed, and that seemed to ignite something in him. I could see the changes when I visited his office one afternoon. The fancy decorations were gone. The expensive coffee machine had been sold. The shiny leather chairs replaced with old ones from a thrift store. But there was something new in the air, a quiet determination. Adam was at his desk when I arrived, hair pushed back, sleeves rolled up, scribbling notes on a whiteboard. When he saw me, he looked surprised, but not annoyed this time. "Hey, Dad," he said with a tired but genuine smile. I nodded toward the whiteboard. "Looks like you're busy. Trying to rebuild," he said. "One piece at a time." He showed me the plans he'd been working on, new clients he was approaching, a revised business model that didn't rely so heavily on risky investors. For the first time, I saw him thinking long-term, not just chasing fast growth. It wasn't easy. Some of his calls went unanswered. Some doors stayed closed. There were days he came home looking like the weight of the world was on his back. But he kept going. I wasn't completely absent. I'd stop by now and then, bringing him coffee or dropping off a home-cooked meal. But I never offered money, never stepped in to fix things. This was his fight now, and he needed to know he could win it on his own. Then came a day of the big pitch. Adam had managed to land a meeting with a potential investor. Not one of the flashy, cutthroat types he'd relied on before, but someone known for supporting sustainable businesses. This meeting could decide whether his company survived or closed for good. That morning, he showed up at my house. He looked nervous, like a boy about to sit for an exam. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "If they say no, I'm done. There's no backup plan this time." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Then you go in there and show them who you are. Not the man who was trying to impress everyone. The man who built something from scratch. The man who didn't give up, even when it all fell apart." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thanks, Dad." I didn't go with him to the meeting. This was his moment, and I wanted him to own it. But I'll never forget pacing the kitchen that morning, glancing at the clock every 5 minutes, waiting for him to call. When the phone finally rang, I almost dropped it in my rush to answer. They said yes. Adam's voice was quiet but full of emotion. "Dad, they're funding the rebuild. Not a huge amount, but enough to get back on track." I closed my eyes and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "That's good," I said, simply, my throat tight. "It's not just good," Adam said. "It's a second chance. And I'm not going to waste it this time." The weeks after Adam secured that funding felt like watching a seed finally sprout after a long winter. His energy shifted completely. He was no longer just reacting to disaster. He was building, planning, leading with purpose. I'd stop by his office every now and then, mostly to drop off food or check in. What I saw gave me a quiet sense of pride. Adam wasn't barking orders or putting on a performance anymore. He was working side by side with his team, helping them with proposals, staying late to run numbers, even cleaning up the office himself when things got messy. One evening, I arrived with a bag of takeout and found him alone, staring at the whiteboard. It was filled with scribbles, arrows, and deadlines. He looked exhausted, but when he turned to me, there was fire in his eyes. "They trusted me with this chance," he said. "I have to make it work." "You're doing more than making it work," I told him. "You're becoming the man I always knew you could be." His face softened at that, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't look like a businessman. He looked like my son. A month later, Adam invited me to a team meeting. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to interfere, but he insisted. "Dad, please. I want you there." When I walked into the office, everyone turned to look. Adam cleared his throat, standing at the front of the room. "I asked my dad to be here today," he said, "because I owe him more than just an apology. I owe him recognition. This company wouldn't exist without him. Every risk I took, every milestone I hit, it was because he believed in me, even when no one else did. And I forgot that for a while. But I won't forget again." For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then the team started clapping, slowly at first, then louder. I felt my throat tighten and my eyes sting. After the meeting, Adam pulled me aside. "I know I can't undo the way I treated you," he said, "but I can show you that I learned my lesson. I don't want you to just be my dad. I want you to be part of this. Not as my safety net, but as my partner." I didn't need money or a title, but hearing those words meant more than anything he could have given me. "I'm proud of you, son," I said, my voice breaking. "Not because you rebuilt the business, but because you rebuilt yourself." He hugged me then, tighter than he had since he was a boy. From that day forward, things didn't magically become perfect, but they became honest. When Adam had a problem, he came to me, not for a bailout, but for advice. When he had a victory, he shared it, not to show off, but to celebrate with the person who had been in his corner from the very beginning. Watching him grow into the man I always hoped he would be wasn't just rewarding, it was healing. The weeks that followed that meeting felt like a new chapter, not just for Adam's business, but for our relationship. For the first time in years, there was no tension hanging between us, no unspoken resentment. When Adam called, it wasn't because he needed a favor. It was just to talk, to share something funny that happened at work, or to ask if I wanted to grab dinner. He began inviting me to small gatherings with his team, introducing me proudly as the man who taught him what hard work really means. Every time he said those words, something in my chest loosened a little more. I started to notice the little things, how Adam listened now when I spoke, how he looked me in the eye, how he made sure to thank me even for small gestures. He wasn't just building a business anymore. He was building character. One evening, we were sitting on my porch, watching the sun set behind the trees. Adam was quiet for a long time before he finally said, "You know, Dad, I used to think success was about proving I didn't need anyone. But now I realize success means having people you can lean on, and people who can lean on you." I nodded, smiling faintly. "Took you long enough to figure that out." He laughed, a genuine laugh that I hadn't heard in a long time. Guess I had to lose everything to see what really mattered. That moment felt like the real victory. Not the new investment, not the rebuilt office, but this quiet evening with my son, where the air was clear between us. From then on, I didn't feel the need to hover or worry. I knew Adam could handle whatever came his way, and he knew he didn't have to face it alone. There were still challenges, late nights at his office, clients who backed out, projects that didn't go according to plan, but now he faced them with humility and determination. Sometimes he'd call and ask for advice, but not for rescue. And every time he did, I gave him my perspective and let him handle the rest. It was strange in a way. I had spent so many years being the safety net that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be a father, to stand back and watch my son grow into his own man without carrying the weight for him. One day, Adam surprised me by inviting me to speak at a local business event. "You've got experience," he said. "People need to hear from someone who knows what real grit looks like." At first, I resisted. Public speaking wasn't my thing. But then I realized this was Adam's way of honoring me, of showing the world what I had done quietly, without recognition. So I stood in front of that room, my voice steady, and told them my story, not just about raising a son, but about learning when to step back and let him fall so he could rise again. When I finished, Adam was standing in the back of the room, smiling proudly. That was the moment I realized something. This whole journey hadn't just been about teaching Adam a lesson. It had been about teaching me one too. I had learned that love isn't about protecting someone from every mistake. Sometimes love means letting them face the consequences, letting them stumble, and trusting that they're strong enough to find their way back. As I sat back down, Adam came over and hugged me. "I'm glad you didn't give up on me," he whispered. "I never did," I said. "I just gave you the space to find your way." And in that moment, I knew we had both grown. This story wasn't about a father who saved his son or a son who finally became grateful. It was about two men, one older, one younger, finding a way to see each other clearly again. I didn't get back the years we spent apart, but I got something better. A son who respected me, who understood what I stood for, and who had earned my pride all over again. And as we walked out of that building together, I felt lighter, stronger, and, for the first time in a long time, completely at peace. If you made it this far, you know this wasn't just a story about business or money or success. This was about family, about pride, and about what it takes to rebuild a broken bond. Have you ever been in Reese's shoes, giving everything you had, only to feel unappreciated? Or maybe you've been where Adam was, so focused on proving yourself that you forgot to honor the people who helped you along the way. I want to hear your story. What would you have done if you were in Reese's place? Would you have cut your son off sooner? Or would you have kept helping him until he figured it out? And if you were Adam, if you suddenly realized you had pushed away the very person who built you up, how would you make it right? Your answers matter. Someone reading the comments today might be going through the same thing, and your words could be what helps them take the first step toward healing. So take a moment and share your thoughts below. Don't just watch and scroll, be part of this conversation. And if this story touched you, hit that like button so more people can find it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We've got more powerful stories like this coming, stories that will make you think, feel, and maybe even see your own life differently. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Because the next story, it might just be the one that changes everything for you.